flower seeds can we sow in June? And June is that time of the year when the temperature's nice and warm in most parts of the world and flowers are starting to come into full bloom. But there's certain seeds that you can sow in June to help prolong the flowering period, to give you beautiful colourful flowers right through the summer and into autumn. So in this video I'm going to share with you 8 varieties of flowers that I'll be sowing in June to give me a really wonderful colourful display of flowers all through the summer and autumn period. Now, a flower that I really love, and I love a consistent supply all through the summer and autumn period, is cosmos. These are cosmos here, and these are an earlier sowing. These are a variety called Picotee. And as you can see here, the flowers are absolutely beautiful. They open out fully with all of their petals on display and have a really nice range of colours. Something else I really love about cosmos is that I love the foliage as well. It's slightly different from most other types of flowers. This green, vibrant foliage really enhances with the flowers themselves and provides a wonderful display when they're in flower beds or in pots, as you can see in front of me here. These will have a range of colours from pinks and whites and blues in this variety. And in order to prolong the flowering of these, you can sow some in early June, and that will give you enough time for them to germinate and to flower before the first frosts hit. So cosmos is a variety of flower that I'd suggest you sow in June, and these can be sown directly into the soil because it's warm enough now in June. Typically 15 to 20 degrees centigrade is what they'll need to germinate. There's no reason why you couldn't start them off inside in pots or in pod trays just to get them started and then plant them out. Now, cosmos are an annual plant, so they'll only grow for 1 year and then they'll die. Now, if you are going to sow cosmos directly outside, you'll need to prepare the ground so the soil is nice and fine, and just sow them very thinly and very shallow. They don't need an awful lot of covering. Just maybe give them a bit of multi-purpose compost just over the top of them, just pat it down and then water them and just keep an eye on them. But cosmos are an excellent flower, and like a lot of flowers, they're excellent pollinators as well. In fact, cosmos is one of the flowers recommended as the best pollinators by the Royal Horticultural Society of the UK. Now, if you were to ever visit me in my garden, you'll always find a display of pansies or violas, and these are something that can also be planted in June. These are a hardy perennial, which is fantastic news because it means that they can grow back over and over again. Now, depending upon when you sow them will depend upon when they will flower. Now, as a hardy perennial, it means that they will survive over colder temperatures. They won't flower in the winter, but they will survive and then rebloom again from February, March, April onwards. Now, as you can see, these particular violas are in a hanging basket, and I have got a few hanging baskets displayed in the same colours. They come in a range of different colours, absolutely beautiful. There's, as you can see here, oranges and whites, but there's some beautiful blue and purple and even yellow ones that give a really fantastic splash of colour in a flower bed or in a hanging basket or a pot. So these can be sown as well in June. Now, if you're going to sow these outdoors, it's recommended that the ground is prepared thoroughly, or if you're going to put them in pots, make sure you've got a good compost. Sow them thinly, and in their final positions they really want to be about 4 inches or 10 centimetres apart, which is 100 millimetres. These are a fantastic flower to grow because of the range of different colours and also the sizes. If you want a larger version of these violas, then you'll be looking at pansies, but they grow in exactly the same way. Now, marigolds are always a bit of a winner in the flower garden. Here you can see I've got some in the middle of my hanging basket. I have got some around the garden. They haven't flowered yet. These were planted 8 to 10 weeks ago. They will start to produce their flower buds very soon. Now, these are a variety of African marigolds called crackerjack. And marigolds are an excellent flower for beginners because they're easy to grow. In June, when the temperatures are as warm as they are, they'll germinate quite quickly, typically within 1 to 2 weeks. And they do require very little maintenance. Now, African marigolds are slightly different from the French marigolds, and if you can see the packet there, these are the seeds that I planted a little bit earlier. They're nice rounded yellow and orange heads, give an absolutely fantastic bright display of flowers. Now, if you have that in your flower bed alongside other flowers, it's absolutely fabulous, and marigolds are extremely popular. So if you want a fast growing flower that will give you a display right through to the autumn period, marigolds might be a good choice for you. If you've not grown marigolds before, just have a look at the difference between French and African marigolds. It really depends upon your own personal preference. I prefer the African marigolds because I just like the more rounded shape of the flowers, but French marigolds provide just as equal a wonderful colourful display. Now, marigolds can be sown directly into the ground in June, or you could put them or start them in pots. When they get to a certain size, you need to thin them out to give them their own space. And one final thing about marigolds, which is fantastic, it's very easy to get the seeds off them. So when the flower heads start to die off, if you let them dry for a number of days, all of the new seed will be inside the flower head, and you can get hundreds of seeds off Marigold. So once you've bought a packet of seeds in the variety you like, it's very easy to get your own seeds for future years. Another flower I'll be planting in June is nasturtiums. Again, another one of my favourite types of flowers, which are reasonably easy to grow. The good thing about nasturtiums is that they flower after a month and a half after germination. So if you decide you're going to sow nasturtiums in June, you're likely to start to get a display from late July, August onwards, and that'll supplement maybe some of the earlier sowings that you've put in. I've already sown a variety called Tom Thumb Mix, and they're now in my pots, hanging baskets and flower beds. And I've also come across another variety of nasturtiums which I've not grown before, called Summer Carousel, and I'm really looking forward to growing them because I like the range of colours. The Tom Thumb ones that I've just sown are a variety of oranges and yellows, but this variety are going to give me a slightly different colour for the nasturtiums, so I'm really looking forward to seeing them. And because it's June, just like some of the other flowers I've already discussed, there's no reason why these shouldn't be sown directly outside, because the temperature now allows the soil to be warm enough for these to germinate. The risk of frost has gone, so therefore the warmer the temperature, the quicker they will germinate. Now when you're sowing nasturtium seeds, whether indoors or outdoors, they're large enough to pick up, so you can sow them at distances that you want them to grow. Typically they want to be about 12 inches apart, and when they do start to grow, you'll notice they'll start to spread with their long spindly foliage, and you get a wonderful display of flowers. I particularly like putting nasturtiums in hanging baskets because when they start to grow they topple over the edge and they can give quite a long display of beautiful flowers, but equally they're just as wonderful in flower beds or in pots. Now a flower that I haven't sown yet this year is Zinnia. Now these are a flower that I really like. They're like a dahlia type of appearance. They're not quite as bold as a dahlia, but they give the same type of appearance in their flowers depending upon the variety that you want. Now the good news about Zinnia is that they can be sown quite late in the year and they're reasonably cold hardy. So that does mean that you can sow Zinnia seeds right through to the end of June. They'll take about 60 to 70 days to germinate, and again because it is June, the temperature will definitely help that process, and that'll give you a wonderful display of colourful flowers right the way through late summer and into autumn, right up to the first frost. Now Zinnia are a fantastic flower to grow because they're fast growing, they don't mind a bit of shade, they're low maintenance, and because of their nectar rich flowers they attract a lot of pollinators into the garden. Now you could sow them inside in pots to start them off in June, but I'm going to sow mine directly outside. The flower beds that I have in my garden I'll prepare, de-weed, get the ground nice and fine and sow them thinly directly into their positions. Because the seeds are quite small, it might mean that I've got to thin them out to round about 1.5 foot, 18 inches to 2 feet, 24 inches once they start to emerge. But if you like dahlias or dahlia type flowers, then Zinnia is definitely something that you want to try in June. Now my next suggestion is a really popular flower, and that is sunflowers. This is a variety called Giant Single, and I've already sown some of these because these can give you a fantastic colourful display for a long period of time. I've got some of these sown in my allotment and they're around about 2 feet 24 inches high at the moment, but I am going to sow some in June as well because I do like a later display. So these will be sown directly into the ground at around about 1.5 centimetres and covered with compost and then watered, and these should give me a display right the way through till October, depending upon the weather conditions and temperature of course. One thing about sunflowers is that they might need a little bit of protection when they're small, so if you are going to plant them directly outside, when they start to emerge you might want to cover them with a little bit of netting just to give them a bit of protection in their early stages, because I've noticed that birds and other insects tend to attack them. Now sunflowers by their nature provide a really bright display of flowers and they're excellent pollinators, and sunflowers are another flower that are recommended by the Royal Horticultural Society of the UK as a pollinator. So if you want a prolonged display of sunflowers, then June would be a good time to sow some more. Now I did one of these flower sowing videos in April, and in that video I recommended a variety of flower which is my absolute favourite, and that is night scented stock. The reason I like night scented stock so much is not just the wonderful display of purple and white flowers, the tiny little flowers that open up in the evening, it's the fragrance they let off. It is really amazing. If you grow these close to your house in pots or baskets, or if you've got a flower bed really near to your house, then of an evening when the flowers open up they let off this wonderful vanilla like fragrance fragrance that is absolutely beautiful. So night scented stock is something that I've already sown in April, a later sowing in May, and I'm also going to sow some in June as well, and that'll give me the continuity of the flowers and the fragrances as long as possible. Now, as I said in the April video, I think that night scented stock are one of the most underrated flowers that are absolutely wonderful for the garden. Now, when you ask people about flowers, they will talk about common varieties, but very rarely is night scented stock ever on their list of favourites. So if you haven't tried night scented stock, then make sure that you give it a go. They do like warm temperatures, so if you've got a nice sunny position in the garden and you want to sow these, then that's the place to put them. And just like the other flower varieties I've already discussed, if you are going to put them outside, just make sure the ground is well prepared, sow them thinly, give them a very light covering of compost or fine soil, and then water them in. Now with night scented stock, when I sow them, I'm not too worried about thinking about whether I need to thin them out or not. The seeds are very small and fine, so I'll take a few between my finger and thumb and just rotate them and just sprinkle them into position. And I don't really do much with them, to be honest, after that point. Just keep them watered and they tend to look after themselves. So night scented stock are a great flower to sow in June. So my final recommendation is another classic, and that is calendula. I've already planted some calendula in May, and this is a variety called Art Shade Mixed. And I was really drawn to this variety because of the pastel shades of the flowers, the sort of off-whites and the yellows and very dull oranges, which I think replicates marigolds in terms of the colour range, but they're not as sharp, so I think that's going to give a really good contrast in the flower bed. Now calendula don't do well in strong direct sunshine, so they're quite good with a little bit of shade. But if you sow these in June, they'll give you a nice display of flowers in your flower bed right from early September and onwards really, until we get to the first frosts. So even though I've already got some of these sown and they're not quite flowered just yet, but they won't be far away, I am going to put another sowing in June just to allow me to get that continuous supply of flowers. And in fact, actually, you've probably noticed from a lot of the recommendations I've made, I've already sown early varieties of some of these flowers. So actually June is a real month for thinking about a longer display of flowers in your flower bed. So if you are going to sow these directly outside, you want to sow them around about 25 centimetres or 10 inches apart, and just give them a fine covering of compost and then water them regularly. And the good news about calendula is there's quite a range of different colours of flowers available, so you can choose whichever colour meets your needs. So that's the end of the video, and I hope it's given you one or two ideas of flower seeds that you might think about sowing in June. Just for the purposes of the video, I'm located right in the centre of the UK in Zone 8, so you may need to check your growing and sowing times based upon your particular area. So I do hope that's given you one or two ideas. It'll also be fantastic to know what flowers that you're sowing in June by popping a comment below this video. That will allow others to see what you're growing and maybe give them and myself one or two ideas. So thank you very much for listening, and if you did like the video, don't forget to give it the thumbs up, and if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit and veg and one or two recipe ideas, then don't forget to press the subscribe button. And I'll see you all on the next video.